Hello and welcome to the Lincoln Journey. Today is part 16 of the Conspirators, where we will embark in earnest on the trial of John Wilkes Booth's alleged accomplices in the murder of Abraham Lincoln. Let's establish some things up front here. I am opposed to capital punishment. If John Wilkes Booth had been captured alive, I think he should have been sentenced to life imprisonment. I know I didn't give him a fair trial just there, but he was guilty. So, when I critically appraise the defendants' guilt or innocence, I will probably also remark on the severity of their punishment, and I will do so based upon the imperfect record of evidence available to me. Anyone who disagrees on any point or points is invited to enter into a discussion on same. I am going to discuss the trial's results for each conspirator alphabetically, only because the Atzerodts conveniently fall last and the most interesting cases should be discussed last. Today we'll discuss the first two on the list. First is Samuel Arnold. The judge advocates weren't interested in making a differentiation between a plot to kidnap the president and a plot to kill the president. They were content to put the worst possible construction on Arnold's words as found in his letter to Booth, which Booth assured him he would destroy, but which Booth conveniently left in a trunk of his belongings in his hotel room, which he certainly knew would be searched after the fracas at the theater. Unable to decide how best to summarize and characterize the key points of his letter, I will simply give it in full. Here, at least, is some context and a little refresher. Arnold and O'Loughlin agree in August of 1864 to help Booth kidnap Lincoln between the city and the Lincoln cottage at the Soldiers' Home. But they take no action by the time the Lincolns move back to the White House in November. At the meeting at Goche's restaurant on March 15th, Booth reveals his cockamamie scheme to kidnap Lincoln by lowering him from the box at Ford's Theater to the stage during a play. Arnold and O'Loughlin are not impressed. On March 17th, the conspirators prepare to abduct the president as he returns from a hospital outside of town. But Lincoln was never there, as Booth probably knew. Afterwards, Booth tells his fellow conspirators that the plan is off for now. Arnold and O'Loughlin check out of their Washington boarding house and return to Baltimore. On March 27th, Booth goes to Baltimore looking for the two and leaves word for Arnold to meet him at the Barnum Hotel. Arnold goes to the hotel, but Booth isn't there. Arnold goes to his family's home in the country and pens this letter. Hookstown, Baltimore County, March 27th, 1865. Dear John, was business so important that you could not remain in Baltimore till I saw you? I came in as soon as I could, but found you had gone to Washington. I called also to see Mike, but learned from his mother that he had gone out with you and had not returned. I concluded, therefore, he had gone with you. How inconsiderate you have been! When I left you, you stated we would not meet in a month or so. Therefore, I made application for employment, in answer to which I shall receive during the week. I told my parents I had ceased with you. Can I then, under existing circumstances, come as you request? You know full well that the government suspicions something is going on there. Therefore, the undertaking is becoming more complicated. Why not, for the present, desist, for various reasons, which, if you look into, you can readily see, without my making any mention thereof. You nor anyone can censure me for my present course. You have been its cause, for how can I now come after telling them I had left you? Suspicion rests upon me now from my whole family, and even parties in the county. I will be compelled to leave home anyhow, and how soon I care not. None, no, not one, were more in favor of the enterprise than myself, and today would be there had you not done as you have. By this I mean manner of proceeding. I am, as you well know, in need. I am, you may say, in rags, whereas today I ought to be well clothed. I do not feel right stalking about with means, and more from appearances a beggar. I feel my dependence, but even all this would and was forgotten, for I was one with you. Time more propitious will arrive yet. Do not act rashly or in haste. I would prefer your first query, go and see how it will be taken at Richmond, and ere long I shall be better prepared to again be with you. I dislike writing, would sooner verbally make known my views, yet your non-writing causes me thus to proceed. Do not in anger peruse this, weigh all I have said, and as a rational man and a friend, you cannot censure or upbraid my conduct. I sincerely trust this, nor aught else that shall or may occur will ever be an obstacle to obliterate our former friendship and attachment. Write me to Baltimore, as I expect to be in about Wednesday or Thursday, or if you can possibly come on, I will Tuesday meet you in Baltimore at Barnum's. Ever I subscribe myself, your friend, Sam. I think everyone will agree on at least one thing, that Arnold would have been better off had he verbally expressed his views rather than writing. Instead, he has favored us with a telling revelation of his thinking, his frustrations with Booth, his fear of exposure, his self-justification, and finally, his faithfulness to Booth. But nowhere does he say, our plan to kidnap the president, or our plan to murder the president, so the government just decided it was the latter. On the other hand, Arnold could prove that he wasn't in Washington the night of the assassination. This and other evidence led to doubt about his guilt in the murder. As a result, the military commission did not reach a unanimous verdict for conviction. It didn't have to. As I intimated several episodes ago, the commission's rules for conviction leave me slack-jawed. Apparently, at the recommendation of their legal advisors, who were also the trial's prosecutors, let that sink in, the commission decided that all that was needed for a conviction was a majority vote of the 9 commissioners. And if that wasn't enough of a slap in the face of Lady Justice, get this. If conviction was supported by at least 2/3 of the judges, the sentence was death. So, 5 votes of 9 gets you convicted. 6 votes get you dead. I suppose there are various ways that you can look at this, but the way I keep thinking about it is this. You could have 6 commissioners convinced that a defendant is guilty. Of the 6, maybe just 1 commissioner is so convinced of the defendant's guilt that he thinks that the death sentence is warranted. And maybe the other 5 are just barely convinced, or maybe they are convinced that a defendant is just barely guilty, and they just want to sentence him to life imprisonment at most. And the result is a hanging. Arnold received only 5 votes for conviction, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment at hard labor on the dry tortugas. Almost no one knows what the dry tortugas are, but if you hear that someone was sentenced to life imprisonment on the dry tortugas, it sounds really bad. It was really bad. This is a group of islands at the extreme west end of the Florida Keys. On one of them stood the unfinished Fort Jefferson, which had been converted into a prison. In Arnold's memoirs, published serially in the Baltimore American newspaper in 1902, he describes poor food, unhealthy quarters, sadistic guards and officers, and brutal punishments, not just for the prisoners, but also commonly applied to soldiers on the post who got drunk or committed other infractions. He describes in detail the soldiers who were literally hung up by their thumbs. If 4 commissioners thought him guilty instead of 5, he would have been a free man. Would that have been fair? He was clearly guilty of plotting to kidnap the president. Indeed, he confessed to this. The laws of war did not condemn kidnapping an enemy, but Arnold was a citizen of a state that didn't leave the Union, so he would not have been considered an enemy combatant. But, you may say, he was being tried by a military commission. But, you may also say, the U.S. government didn't recognize the secession of any state, So why weren't all of the belligerent acts of Americans against their government treated as treason? That's a very good question. Thank you for asking. The Constitution defines treason as follows. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. Didn't all the Confederate soldiers levy war against the United States? Didn't all of the Lincoln assassination conspirators adhere to the enemies of the United States and give them aid and comfort? This needs a fuller discussion than we can have here. I might recommend that you read historian Jonathan White's book, Abraham Lincoln and Treason in the Civil War. But suffice it to say here that the government conducted almost no treason trials during the war, largely because it was afraid it would lose one and set an unhelpful precedent. But back to Sam Arnold. He probably did deserve a life sentence, though under less appalling conditions, and he's lucky that there wasn't one more commissioner who thought so, or the construction detail would have built a longer scaffold. Arnold was pardoned by President Johnson in 1869, and after nearly 4 years in that hellish prison, in which he survived a yellow fever epidemic, Arnold lived many years in quiet seclusion. However, the Lincoln assassination story was perennially topical. Think Kennedy assassination. Or have people quit talking about that now? And the misconceptions and the falsehoods rankled him to the point that he finally began writing his memoirs in the 1890s, based on the notes and diaries he kept while imprisoned. He meant for it to be published after his death, but he changed his mind after an odd incident. In 1902, another Sam Arnold died, and some newspapers, thinking it was him, ran his obituary, which was usually less than complimentary. Outraged, he soon came to a deal with the Baltimore American, which published his memoirs that same year. Sam Arnold really died in 1906, the last conspirator to die except for the Surratt who got away. Let's now discuss George Atzerodt. The Prussian immigrant dubbed Port Tobacco because Anna Surratt couldn't pronounce his surname is something of an enigma to me. It's easy to characterize him as shiftless and weak-minded, but Wilkes Booth must have seen something in Atzerodt that made him worth keeping around. The main qualification that recommended him in the first place was his success in evading Union vessels while rowing Confederate agents across the Potomac from near his home in Port Tobacco, Maryland. So he demonstrated some initiative, but his elevation to a key member of the conspiracy may have been more a matter of a scarcity of willing accomplices, and yet his willingness evaporated when the plot turned from kidnapping to murder. Maybe Booth realized too late what a liability George could be, especially in his cups and puffing himself up, and figured if he didn't keep Port Tobacco close, he might jeopardize the operation. While the government was deciding whom of its hundreds of detainees it would actually charge in the conspiracy, authorities made it clear to Atzerodt that in the upcoming trial, he could be a witness and live, or be a defendant and die. He began to sing like a cuckoo clock, but he didn't sing anything on the prosecutor's request list. Most of what he told them was second-hand or hopelessly contradictory. Unlike Louis Weichmann and John Lloyd, who could both easily have been indicted, he had no compelling first-hand testimony implicating anyone the government had in its sights, especially the elusive Confederate government. So he wore the manacles, the canvas hood, and the hempen rope. Atzerodt, you will remember, didn't kill anyone. He didn't even savagely stab people or beat their brains out with a pistol butt like Powell. Assigned to kill Andrew Johnson, he took a room at Johnson's hotel, but never did more than get someone to point out the vice president to him at a hotel restaurant. Should he have been executed? No, capital punishment is wrong. Okay, but was he as guilty as someone who actually killed someone? Yes. Attempted murder is not a capital crime. Conspiracy to commit murder is not a capital crime if no murder occurs. But if a murder results from a conspiracy, Those who helped plot the murder are as guilty as the person who did the deed. They assisted in the commission of the murder, they knew the murder was planned, and instead of doing something to stop it, they abetted the crime. Atzerodt was not only involved with the kidnapping scheme, he stuck around for the bloodbath. He was at the meeting in the Herndon House, Powell's Hotel, the night before the attacks. He did not deny these things. He only tried to argue a lesser guilt due to his lack of action. His attorney produced witnesses on his behalf, the most noteworthy of whom were 4 men who all testified that Atzerodt was well known as a coward. Testimony in the trial ended on June 30th, 1865. The judges took a day and a half to come to their decisions. Atzerodt received at least 6 votes for conviction, meaning a death sentence. The verdicts were to go to the president for approval, but Johnson was ill. They didn't reach him until July 5th. He approved them, and the executions were scheduled for 2 days later, July 7th. The condemned heard of their sentences 1 day before their execution. I don't know about you, but I think that's messed up. Pleas for clemency had little, if any, chance. An insight into the process is provided by Commissioner Lew Wallace, later the author of the Sword and Sandal epic, Ben-Hur, who wrote his wife after the defense closed that 3, if not 4, of the 8 will be acquitted, that is, if we voted today. But then they heard Assistant Judge Advocate John Bingham's 2-day summation. One of the prison staff who heard him said Bingham's invective, quote, burned and seared like a hot iron. But when he touched upon the great and lovable qualities of the martyred Lincoln, his lips would quiver with emotion, and his voice became as tender and reverent as if he were repeating the Lord's Prayer, close quote. Bingham didn't present new evidence. He only proved himself masterfully persuasive, to the point that 3 or 4 votes for acquittal became votes to convict. Meaning, the way I see it, that if Wallace was right, 1 or more commissioners didn't think there was sufficient evidence to convict several defendants. But once a skilled barrister got their blood up, they decided, well, let's at least send them to prison anyway. I think that's messed up too. A side note here. If information exists that tells how many votes were received by those conspirators who were hanged, I don't have it. We know that the convicted conspirators who were sentenced to life imprisonment received 5 votes, but as for those who were executed, I only know that they received 6 or more of 9 possible. Rather than recount Atzerodt's last hours here, I will wait until we can discuss all of the doomed at once. Next, alphabetically, is Davy Harold. Davy will catch you next time on Part 17 of The Conspirators.